Hey everyone, I am here to talk about this beautiful configuration that's going on in the sky right now between the outer planets and with Jupiter, who is in Leo. This is, how they always say like once in a lifetime, and this might be once in a lifetime because the idea that Jupiter is talking to these outer planets that are all at 4 degrees. Um, that usually doesn't happen. So in this video, we're going to talk about the configuration, the energies, the way that I'm reading them, the number four, and how I read that, especially in the tarot, and then just some little observations, how I think we can be integrating this energy as we move forward. So I'm going to pause real fast and bring up the chart. Okay, so you guys can see right here, it is July 18th and it is July 18th. But I put this, it's a little later than 11:20 when I'm recording this. But I went ahead and did it because I wanted to get it right when Jupiter is at 0 minutes. So as you can see, Jupiter is at 4 degrees and 0 minutes of Leo. Um, and he is conjunct the sun, who is still in Cancer because we're still in Cancer season. And then he is sextiling Uranus, who is at 4 degrees of Gemini, who is ding, 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 coming down here and trining Pluto, who's at 4 degrees of Aquarius retrograde. And then right here we have um, Neptune, who's 4 degrees of Aries. And as you can see, it is trining Jupiter, who's at 4 degrees of Leo. So that configuration right there is what's making this once in a lifetime, right? Because when those outer planets, Pluto, um, Neptune, and Uranus, they're on the other side of Saturn. They're not like the personal planets like Mars, Venus, the Moon, the Sun, Mercury. They all move really fast. The outer planets move a lot slower. So when they come into this configuration where they're all able to boop and talk to each other mathematically, that's a really big deal. So there's, I'm just going to tell you guys how I'm reading this, okay? Because there's lots of people that have different thoughts on this, which is great, okay? And I was listening to Heather Insworth this morning, and people are calling it a basket, but she said there's also some people calling it a cauldron, right? So I think that's really neat too. Um, but it is this idea of energy being held and coming from somewhere and what we're going to do with it. So let's just start with Jupiter. Jupiter rules Sagittarius, okay? Jupiter is the biggest planet. Jupiter represents faith and luck. Um, we always say Jupiter is very jovial. That's why I always tell my little Saggies to say no because you guys just keep expanding, expanding, expanding. And so Jupiter is all about expansion, but it's also about faith, um, and believing in things that maybe we don't see, right? But we just know, or you know, just to think that are real, feel that are real, right? It is that faith. And it's sitting there at 4 degrees of Leo, and it's also conjunct the sun. And what's interesting is that the sun rules Leo. And the way that I read the chakra systems, which is different than others too, the way that I read it, I see that our solar plexus is Leo. That is our self-esteem, right? That is how we move forward. And so Jupiter sitting in there is getting warmed up, right? Is going to, and this is always like a higher, you want this to be a higher vibration of Leo, knowing who you are, and feeling good about that moving forward. Obviously the lower idea of that would be, a narcissist who's has very grandiose ideas of who they are, but at 4 degrees of Leo, so those early degrees, that page energy, but knowing who it is, right? And it's going to be expanding on this idea of faith in Leo, so expanding on this idea of the inspiration of moving forward, knowing who we are at a deep level, and going with that. And then it is in conversation with Uranus, who is at 4 degrees of Gemini. Gemini is communication. Um, Uranus is rules Aquarius. Uranus is that revolution. Uranus is the aha moment. Uranus comes out of nowhere, right? Um, Uranus is the disruptor in a sense too, right? And so, but it was really interesting because being in Gemini and going back to that conversation I was listening to this morning, but the idea of the twins, Postor and Calyx, was it not Postor? Postor. You guys are going to say its name because now I got it said it wrong. So anyway, the twins, right? And they're always in communication with each other. But it is in Gemini is mutable. But it is that idea of it could be the in between, right? Because Gemini is communication. So you're gathering information in order to make the best decision, in order to communicate that, because it's ruled by Gemini. I mean, it's ruled by Mercury, but also it is to communicate ways to move forward. And so Uranus in there is, um, I always say it's like blowing up those old ways of communication, but it's also like transforming the way we used to communicate or transforming what we communicated, and transforming or bringing in new ideas, right? New ways to communicate. Um, so then when we go down to 4 degrees of Neptune and Aries, I find this really interesting too because Aries is cardinal. Aries wants to move. Aries is that fire. And then Neptune rules Pisces, and Pisces is that divine feminine energy. Pisces is very watery. Pisces is the unconscious. Um, and Neptune is the idea of the unconscious and faith and like and knowing there's a higher presence, like a higher being. So it's the unconscious and then how can I say this? Like the unconscious, I keep want to say subconscious, but also knowing that, spirituality, that's the word I was thinking of, but also working with the idea of spirituality, which again, you can't see, um, but you can feel. And Aries, being that cardinal fire sign, wants to move this forward, but maybe really isn't sure how because it is feelings, right? And the feeling that Aries gets is, excitement, passion, desire, that fire, right? And when you bring in Neptune, who's all this water, who is going in the deep, who is uncovering things that maybe we didn't realize before, but also bringing in this deep sense of spirituality that's always been there. Um, Aries is like figuring out how to navigate this new terrain. And then we go down to the 4 degrees of Pluto, who rules Scorpio, some more water energy, in Aquarius. And Pluto is that death, right? Pluto is that transformation. Um, Pluto is bringing in, and you know what? Pluto, and I will say this too, which I don't know if anyone else would say this, but because I'm thinking of the death card in the tarot, it is also a truce. The death card in the tarot has that Tudor rose on it, which represents a truce. And it's like, okay, we got to call a truce. This is where we are. We got to move forward. Okay, we've got to transform this. We got to transmute this, right? We've got to let this go in order to get things to move forward. So, and it is an Aquarius, right? And Aquarius is a fixed sign. So we have mutable air, fixed air, cardinal fire, fixed fire, which is also that story about us moving into that fire air axes instead of the and moving out of the water earth axes. But Aquarius bringing in, who's ruled by Uranus. So bringing in this revolution, bringing in this, Aquarius is always about the individual and then the community, right? So it's okay to be yourself, but it's also okay to feel safe as being yourself, right? And so the four of them and the number four, they're in this great big th this is what they're talking about. How do we move forward with um, confidence? How do we have faith in what we don't know, right? How do we move forward with confidence when the way that we used to communicate, we're in between ways of communication. We are in between ways of bringing in spirituality. What does that mean? We are going through our unconscious and the subconscious, right? Digging things up in order to let them go, in order to move forward. We are definitely seeing old systems die and fall. There are places that we just have to call a truce because we need to keep moving forward. And that can seem really uncomfortable. It can seem exciting, I guess, for some of us, It can seem right on time. Um, but it is this idea that they're having this conversation with Jupiter and the fact that we have to have faith that it's going to turn out correctly. It's going to turn out, there's something bigger than us that's keeping us cradled in this basket, cradled in this cauldron, right? Allowing us to write these new stories when it comes to astrology and the way that we read the stars, the way that we read ourselves as humans, right? When it comes to our potential and what we can do with that. And so that is the energies that I see that we're working with within these signs and these giant planets as we move forward. Um, I'm trying to decide if I want to go into the number four. Yeah, we'll go into the number four. So when we talk about the number four, and this is also really interesting. So when we talk about the number four, so I'm going to bring the number four up in the tarot, and that is, oh shit, not again. Okay, that is the Emperor card. And what's so interesting about this being the Emperor is that this astrology that we use is the same that we've been using since the Age of Aries. And Aries is ruled by Mars, and that is the emperor. You can see the ram's heads. I don't know. You can see the ram's heads, right? And that's about Mars. Um, and so, one of the things that we are talking about, which I think fits in perfectly with this whole configuration, is this idea. Okay, okay, so this is Aries, right? And so, moving forward, how do we talk about the energies of these planets? And I remember in 2019, or no, yeah, 2019, when I was like, I need to start doing this publicly and get on the ball with this. I remember just thinking to myself, I was like, we can't keep talking about these planets the same way because we're moving into a new age, the age of Aquarius. We can't. These planets want us to talk differently about themselves. And then it was a few years later that I came across Heather Ainsworth's channel. And she was saying the same thing. And I was like, oh my God, right? Oh, there's other people out there that are saying the same thing. And I don't know if you call that 100th monkey syndrome. I don't know, but that's the idea of like collective consciousness and thinking about things and then finding people vibrating at that same energy as you and helping bring in, right, this new energy. So, one of the main stories that we've been talking about and people have been talking about and I've been talking about is that idea of that divine feminine energy rising, rewriting this patriarchal narratives, right? Turning that masculine, the idea of that masculine, that conqueror, bringing him into the more divine masculine energy of accountability, compassion. And so that's how, I read the Emperor. And so it's really interesting and like getting out of those old patriarchal norms. So it's really interesting that this is all happening to me on that number four, when the number four in the tarot is the Emperor. is the divine masculine. And it is about how do we move that forward. And we have to remember, like when we talk about masculine and feminine energies, we have those both within us. How do we move forward in compassion when what's been modeled to us isn't that, it hasn't been that. It's been might makes right, the spoils go to the victor, all those, fill in the blanks, you got it. But now that these are actually kind of playing out in real time, we're like, that's not good. There's plenty of spoils. What are you talking about? Might doesn't make right, there's plenty to share, there's plenty to go around. And I will tell you this too, sidebar, I was watering my plants this morning and I was like, oh my God, going back to the idea of um where are we? Neptune and Aries moving forward and things coming from the unconscious or the subconscious. And if you're talking about like past lives and all that stuff, I was like, what the? I was like, we did not survive all those millions of years of war and destruction just to be in a state where a handful of techno dudes run everything. Like, fuck that. So just letting you guys know that. And I mean that, like, seriously. We didn't do all this just to get here for that to happen. Okay. And that is also part of the story. Okay. That revolution is coming in. Um, that transmutation and transformation is coming in. Okay. The idea of the inflated ego, if you're going with a lower vibe in Leo with Jupiter. It's getting a new story. It's going to be met with the resistance, right? Because the resistance is, well, it is Aquarius, it is Uranus. And so there is that energy going to be there. The way that we rewrite the story of the emperor, I think, is here, and that is what's coming in. And it's going to be rewritten differently for everyone, but the understanding how to move forward, because the way that we see the masculine energy is how we move forward. Um, how we conquer things, right? How we show up, right? What is that going to look like from this point forward? If this is, we're calling that truce, if we're putting that line in the sand, how are we moving forward as emperors that embody that masculine and feminine energy? All right, because the idea of that divine masculine is that he listens to his intuition. That's what makes him divine, right? That's what makes him move forward in alignment. And so I think also with this story going to with like this, we've been using the tropical zodiac, right, from 5,000 years ago or so, right? This age of Aries. And it's so weird to think how we just got caught like um in those same systems, right? And now we're seeing how these systems really, really aren't working anymore and how we can change them. And it is confusing. And it is how do we do that? And it is how do we integrate this? But it can be done. And it has been done all the time. We integrate new things, we change things, we streamline things, how we can make things better. And so one of the stories that we're going to tell about this, and then I'll wrap it up, is this idea about how we read astrology and what's coming in with true sky and living sky astrology, right? And so what that works with is, so right now on this chart that we've been using for thousands of years, it says the sun is at 26 degrees of Cancer. When if you look at the true sky or the living sky, you will actually see the sun, and I don't know where it is right now because I didn't look, is probably in a different constellation. And so that is blowing everything up. Now, why in the hell, okay, like why in the hell we haven't just been following the sun, right, and the stars and watching them go the constellations, why we stuck with this for thousands of years, I don't know. Does this mean that I'm not going to keep reading this? No, it does not mean that because I have an affinity for this. This is what I've learned. This is what I love. I resonate 100% with the ideas that my sun is in Aquarius, right? And my moon is in Leo and all those things. Okay. But when you start to look at where things are in the sky in real time, and the difference between true sky and living sky is that true sky works with the boundaries of the constellations, like given by NASA. And living sky is a little more intuitive, right? And it can go with like the older constellations that were huge, right? That were like half the sky, right? So when you were navigating the sky, you didn't have that many constellations. You had a real big one and then lots of stars and stuff within that constellation. Um, and again, why we got away from that seems kind of weird now. Like that's weird because that's how we navigated. Um, but also I was kind of thinking about it, and if you think about things like and like church and what they did to Da Vinci and all that stuff, so maybe they just were like, you know what, we'll just keep this and keep our heads down, right? I don't know. I don't know why, but maybe that's part of the reason. Um, but this idea of us going into um, a, a different way of communicating how to work with astrology, okay? How to work with what is happening now, right? How to work navigating different energies, right? And like layering them on top of us. So we have this system, and now there's these two other systems. Can we bring them together in order to have a fuller story? To have um, a better way, right, to discuss what's going on, a different way to discuss the past and the future, right? Blowing up the idea of like, nope, this is it. This is what we're going to do. We've been doing it for thousands of years. Going to do it for, you know, calling a truce within ourselves, transforming um, the way we used to think and talk about things, right? Being confident, having faith that we can do that. We're not going to all do it today. We're not going to all do it tomorrow. Um, but we will get there. It will take some time of integration. And the way that I see it, it's like when we talk about our masculine and feminines integrating, this idea of working with the tropical zodiac from the age of Aries, right? That masculine energy, toxic masculine energy, but then layering in where we are now, getting us back into a new alignment, right? I really feel like this is one of the main stories of the basket, of the cauldron, and how we can move forward. But seeing that in the bigger picture, seeing that in those energies and stories that we've been told, um, and now they're all getting a little bit or a lot of it deconstructed, you know, ending. And I'll say this too. Heather always talks about the idea of, um, well, I think too. I think people that like, well, for me, like rewriting these stories because it doesn't make any sense that, Mars from 5,000 years ago was the Mars today. Like no, that just doesn't make any sense. But she talks about the idea of, patterns repeating, and we talk about that too, like with karma and things like that. And I'm probably using the word karma wrong, but yeah, I think you guys know what I mean. And the idea that if we start writing these new stories and start speaking these new stories, that gets us out of those old loops. That's what gets us out of those old patterns because she speaks of a time instead of like continuously, because they'll say things are a pendulum or things are a wheel and it like goes this way or that way. But she thinks we're at a crossroads of time, that we can get out of those loops, right? And I think one of the ways that we do that is rewriting these stories and speaking differently about them and integrating what's going on within us, what's going on in the actual sky, what's having different conversations with the living sky, going back to the idea that anyone can see where a planet is and talk to that planet, right? That intuitiveness, that's realigning that masculine and feminine energies, right? That's realigning the story of the emperor that's within all of us. So I'm going to leave that there. If you guys have questions, please reach out. The way that, Jupiter will keep moving, these others planets will stay there until they move. So this isn't like a one and done. Oh, we're here. Oh, okay, that happened. It's that energy that starts permeating, right? It's the energy that will come in and start these new stories. But I really want you guys to know it is about having faith that we can do this. Yes, it might seem a little uncomfortable. Yes, but there's no reason to freak out, okay? There's no reason to freak out. We are really good at adapting as humans. We're actually really smart and we can learn things. And I will say this too, if you guys are having high anxiety, try to get off the internet as much as possible. Go touch grass, go lay in the sun. Um, that's going to help bring that anxiety down. And of course, if it's, if you're having more with it, then always reach out to someone for help. There's no wrong and shame in that. But understand we're at these young energies. Understand. Isn't it funny we're at these young energies yet? Um, the Emperor is the number 4 card. Um, and he's ready for the story to change. He's ready for a new story about how he conducts his business. He wants to be reconnected with his divine feminine, right? He wants to be whole, right? He wants to be seen as um maybe not so much as, I mean, he does he wants to be seen as aligned. He wants to be seen as making smart choices as we move forward. So, okay, I'm going to leave it there. I'll keep going. All right, if you guys have any questions, please reach out. I hope you guys have a great weekend, and I will see you soon.